The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents Jesus' Other 3 Days. Hey everybody, welcome. Hope you're doing well. This is about, as I said, Jesus' other 3 days, because when you hear on the third day or 3 days and it's related to Jesus, most of people will probably think that we're talking about the resurrection. When you hear that, it's, oh, on the third day he rose from the dead. And even in the book of Matthew, it talks about, 3 days and 3 nights shall the Son of Man be in the ground, just as Jonas was in the belly of the whale. And by the way, I will say whale. This is an extra little tidbit for all of you out there who are tired of being corrected. When somebody says, oh, it doesn't say Jonah was in the belly of a whale. It says a great fish. Yes, that's actually what it says in English in the Old Testament. And in the New Testament, in Matthew chapter 12, I think it is, it says whale in the King James Version. So if they're going to be pedantic, you can tell them they can be consistently pedantic about it. But what else will we possibly mean by great fish? It's not like we're going to hear the QI klaxon for saying blue whale, and nobody should. But it wasn't 3 days and 3 nights that Jesus was between his death and his supposed resurrection, because if he died on a Friday, they moved him to a tomb Friday night after petitioning Pilate, which is something that already seems fairly absurd, but we're not here to dig in on the Easter account. Then they post guards to the tomb on the Saturday morning, and then on Sunday morning, earthquake, empty tomb, ta-da, resurrection. But the whale thing's just a bonus bit of information. When you think about 3 days as it is referenced in the Bible, there are many, many passages that reference 3 days, beginning even in Genesis, where Abraham is talking about something for 3 days. There's a significance to the numbers that are used in storytelling. I don't mean this, and please do not start down this path of, oh my gosh, Matt's talking about mythicism and myth building and all that. No, I'm not advocating for mythicism. I'm saying that when we tell stories, even if they're true, they are often embellished and neatened so that we get cool, clear pictures that resonate with people. Fish tales, perhaps, is a way of putting it. I caught a fish that was this big. But there's also the stories about destroying and rebuilding the temple in 3 days. And that in Luke chapter 2, which is what we're going to talk about in a moment, Jesus was in the temple for 3 days. Which events from Jesus's life can we verify? I've spoken about mythicism in the past, and while I'm not a mythicist, I think that while there are a couple different camps of mythicists, at least one of them is a scholarly, historian-based view that makes a good case that it's more likely than not that Jesus did not exist as a historical figure, or at least the character presented in the Bible and the details from that individual's life did not occur either at all or as represented. There's a good case to be made for that. And the way that I've often recommended people do it is to make a list of everything that we know about Jesus's life as reported in the Bible, and then go through and scratch off any of the things that cannot be confirmed or that haven't been confirmed. Was Jesus born of a virgin? I don't know how you would confirm that. Certainly hasn't been confirmed. Doesn't matter how many people believe it. Was he born at all? Well, if he existed, I think it's a reasonable inference that he was born and that he didn't just miraculously show up on the planet. But when we're talking about a God and a God taking human form, there might be other ways. Did he exist in the physical realm? Well, I don't know how you would verify that. I'm not necessarily saying that it's unrealistic to say that, oh, here's a character we're speaking of as if they existed historically. Of course, they existed. They were born. That's the default view of things. But what about Jesus teaching and learning from the rabbis in the temple? Can we verify that? Or his baptism at the hands of John the Baptist? What about the temptation by the devil? I don't know how you would verify any of these things, especially once we start getting into the realm of miracles and the supernatural. How do you confirm the miracle reports? Can you confirm that he recruited disciples? Now we're getting closer to something that may be verifiable, in that there are people who believe we have firsthand accounts from apostles. Unfortunately, the evidence doesn't support that notion, and it would be a bit of a mistake to reach the conclusion that this were necessarily true. But I don't have a problem with the notion that someone, is the center of these stories that actually existed. What about his teaching? Do we have an accurate representation of what he taught? The words, maybe the spirit of it, maybe the gist of it? How about his arrest, his crucifixion, or his resurrection? We don't know. There's Jesus's other 3 days, though. The one I'm going to talk about is mentioned only once, and it's in Luke chapter 2, verses 41 through 52. I'll go ahead and read those to you, and we'll get back to some of them in a bit. But beginning at chapter 2, verse 41. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast. And when they had fulfilled the days, as they returned, the child Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and his mother knew not of it. But they, supposing him to have been in the company, went a day's journey, and they sought him among their kinfolk and acquaintance. And when they found him not, they turned back again to Jerusalem, seeking him. And it came to pass that after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions. And all that heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. And when they saw him, they were amazed. And his mother said unto him, Son, why hast thou thus dealt with us? Behold, thy father and I have sought thee sorrowing. And he said unto them, How is it that ye sought me? Must ye not know that I must be about my father's business? And they understood not the saying which he spake unto them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was a subject unto them. But his mother kept all the sayings in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. That's basically the end of Luke chapter 2. So they left Jerusalem, and I want to be as fair about this as possible. It's clear from the description that what they're saying is Joseph and Mary and a bunch of their kinfolk left Nazareth, went to Jerusalem for Passover. I don't have any reason to believe that happened. I don't have any reason to believe it didn't happen. I don't know. I mean, how do you verify any of this? But they went to Jerusalem for Passover. And it was their tradition, evidently, to go every year. But this was the year when Jesus was 12. It's important to note, no other gospel, other than Luke, has anything at all from Jesus's youth. All the rest of them go basically from birth to adulthood. This is the only one that tells any story from Jesus's youth. The only one that tells this story, which means we can't even look at other gospels to see if this is verified. This is an oddity that just exists in Luke. Now, so they go to Jerusalem, they participate in the Passover, then they leave, and they travel a day before they realize that Jesus isn't with them. Now, that's not completely ridiculous. I told the story on the Hang Up about how my mom got left at her grandmother's. They had 4 kids. They weren't even traveling with a big caravan. Sure, I could see that if a whole bunch of kinfolk traveled a multi-days journey to get somewhere, that, Jesus isn't necessarily, in our wagon or with our donkeys. He's, off with his cousins playing there, further back in the caravan. I can understand how things like that can happen. But when they find out that he's not there after a day, they have to turn around and come back. So now 2 days have transpired. And so when it says that in verse 46, it came to pass that after 3 days they found him in the temple. It's unclear if this means 1 day of traveling out, 1 day of traveling back, and 1 day of searching Jerusalem for a total of 3 days. Or if it means 1 day traveling out, 1 day traveling back, and then 3 days searching Jerusalem. But the story is here not to get the amount of days right. It's just strange that Jesus essentially must have been sleeping, eating, and staying at the temple, or maybe living on the streets but spending all of his time in the temple for at least 3 days, possibly 3 to 5 days. None of these things can be confirmed, and it's kind of ridiculous. The 3 days that they spent looking for him, or that he was missing, why 3 days? Oh, it's a day out, a day back, and they could have found him right away. But did nobody at the temple think to say, hey, where is this child's parents? Should we send out messengers? Should we send our fastest horse out to find? Have they left Jerusalem? Do they live here in Jerusalem? Why is there a 12-year-old who's just hanging out at the temple for days and days and nobody seems to be doing anything about it? It's because he's so miraculous. Jesus' teaching was so significant. And that's the true purpose of this story. The purpose of the story is to show a savant-like special child who has information, to portray him as this, God-child character. Now, I don't think the story happened. I think that the story is pretty ridiculous. But the grouping of 3 days, we see this all the time. When we tell stories, we tend to embellish themes. And in the same way, we're often fond of alliteration. We're also fond of using numbers. And 3, to quote Schoolhouse Rock, is a magic number. Yes, it is. The first time we hear something, it's strange, it's unusual. The second time we hear something, we're remembering, hey, I think I've heard that before. And the third time we hear something, there's a pattern. And I remember I've talked about the power of the number 3 before, and the pastor who gave a sermon about how our bodies in every way are divided into 3s. There's 3 joints on my finger. I've got a hand, lower arm, upper arm. I've got my head, my torso, my legs, all this. And all of it is speaking to the Trinity. A stool, you have to have 3 legs to have a stool that will stand up stable. One day, if the child was gone or missing for 1 day, well, that could just be a mistake or no big deal. But 2 days, well, we know people tend to embellish. So maybe 2 days is actually only 1 day. But by golly, when we get to 3 days, clearly something's happened because 3 days is a proper long time. Hell, 3 days is a long weekend. And yet we know that the Bible plays fast and loose with dates and times that don't make any sense. And it's far more important to make it seem like here's something significant, even though it's only reported in a single gospel, and like every other aspect of Jesus's reported life, it's something that we cannot verify. Now, when we're telling stories, even if they're about people we know, embellishment happens. I wouldn't fault stories from the past just because they were embellished. But when it comes to something like the Bible, when it comes to something like the story of Jesus, what we're talking about here is something that people are basing their lives off of. This is supposed to be true. It is supposed to be the message from the all-knowing, all-powerful governor of the universe. It's supposed to be absolutely, without question, reliable. Yes, the apologist will say, look, it can't be that because human hands have touched these stories. Human minds are reading these stories. They've translated these stories. There are going to be scribal errors and mistakes and possibly embellishments. But that makes things worse. Because if you're going to say, yes, the story of Jesus is true, which part of the story of Jesus is true? The part that's not embellished? The part that isn't, fond of using numerology? The part that isn't a slight exaggeration? And with no means to verify any particular point or item or story from Jesus's life, it suddenly becomes within reach to start making mythicist claims. And while I'm not, as I've said a billion times now, a mythicist, I think the mythicist case for saying it's less likely that these stories are true and point to a real extant person than it is that they are exaggerations or utter fictions that may not point to any single individual at all. Do I lean toward mythicism now? No, because I'm still not objecting to the notion that there might be a person involved or behind this. It's just that I don't know what we can say we know about them, if anything. And I've spent way more than 3 days thinking about this. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.